Alrighty, welcome everybody for joining us today for the sixth session in our local leaders series. For those that don't know me, I am Dan Mingo with Cascade Bridge, and I am the current chair of the Construction Leadership Council. So I will be moderating today's event. And I'm lucky to be joined by none other than Greg Morrill from Bergerson Construction, also on the executive board of AGC this year. So, Greg, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my company and kind of my journey into construction leadership. So it's definitely non-traditional. Um, so my name is Greg Morrill. I'm president and owner of Bergerson Construction in Astoria, and been in the construction industry a long time, since 1991. So anyway, I'm going to do a little slideshow here, just tell you a little bit about Bergerson Construction. So I'll share my screen. All right, so Bergerson Construction has been around a little bit longer than I've been alive. So it certainly wasn't founded by me. I worked for the original founder when I first started here, but we do primarily marine and heavy civil construction. So it's a little bit different than typical construction. So when I talk about marine construction, I'm just going to show you just a few slides here of the types of projects we do. So basically, waterfront structures. So here's an example of a pier we did several years ago. A lot of our equipment has to be on barges so we can access the work. Uh, and then, yeah, various challenges trying to get the product out to the structure. In this example, pouring concrete out over the water presents some unique challenges. Lots of pile driving in our work. Most of our structures are supported by driven steel piles, timber piles, concrete piles, or something like that. Another example of pile driving. As you can see, like access to and from the equipment can be a challenge. Here is really easy because the barge is close to the beach. Just throw up a gangway and crew members can get back and forth. But get farther offshore, it's going to be boat access only. Just some more examples of pile driving out on the water. And then once you get the piles driven, you've got some kind of structure on top of that. Here, we're setting precast deck panels for a pier for Oregon State down in Newport. And then a lot of utilities. Here, an example of a utility trench in the structure itself. A steel fender system on the right there for the boats to go up against. You can't really see it, but there's some rubber cushions between that steel beam and the concrete structure. Here's an example of a seawall project up in Everett, Washington. And then a timber wharf on steel piles, also in Everett, Washington. That's the completed product there. This is the Selwood Bridge in Portland. Many of you are familiar with that. We had a very small piece of the work, basically removing the temporary work bridges. So that was kind of an interesting project. We were involved in some jetty construction out by the mouth of the Columbia River. We didn't really do the jetty work itself, but building some temporary facilities for barges to bring in stones. This is up by Beacon Rock State Park near Bonneville Dam. These are navigational structures, just marking these were marking submerged jetties down by Bandon. Warning boaters. There are signs that go on these. Here's what's called a range structure to help ships line up on the center of the channel. So we built that. And then there's the less glorious piece of marine construction, which is repair work. You're in underneath an existing structure, get a lot of marine growth. Everything's affected by the tides. So fortunately on this project, all we were doing was setting up the temporary access platforms, and somebody else was doing all of the concrete repair work, which was months and months and months of chipping out concrete and repairing rebar and pouring grout back in there, and just grueling labor. So I'm glad we didn't have to do that. Once in a while, we have a marine structure that has land access. This is an odd one. We just drove a forklift out there at low tide, but the good low tides were at night. And so that's why we're working at night. And then there's a lot of rehab of existing structures here. We put these pile wraps on existing timber piles. This was a historic bridge in Yellowstone Park in Wyoming. Another example of a pier structure. Pile driving. Pile cap construction once the piles are driven. Another example. And then we get into dredging. So this is pipeline dredging. You got a dredge head with a pump inside there, with a cutter head on the end of it. It's all mounted to an excavator, and then it agitates the soil at the bottom of the river or the bay, and then sucks it up and sends it out through a floating pipeline to wherever the disposal location is. Sometimes that's in the water, sometimes that's upland. Here's another example of that equipment. You can see the floating pipeline there off to the right. And then here's an example of a retention pond if we're pumping the material upland. So that's a little, really brief overview of the type of work that we do as a company. But I'd like to talk about my path into construction. So in high school, I was an outstanding student, definitely college bound. I was valedictorian of my class, and thought I was going to go off to college and conquer the world. I was also a musician, and it just, stood to reason that I should go to college to study music. So I headed off to college as a music major. I got there, and man, there were a lot of really talented musicians all around me. And I started to realize, partway in that, man, a lot of these folks with all this talent are going to be, working some menial job to support their habit. And why in the world am I spending all this money for college? So, plus I just kind of hit the wall. I was just burned out on school. So I took a break, and I've been on break from college ever since. So anyway, so I found myself in a position where I didn't know what to do with my life. Throughout high school, I had always worked various labor jobs. I'd done some farm labor, worked in Safeway stocking shelves, and what I learned in that process growing up was I'd found great success in showing up and I found great success in working hard. Um, so when I dropped out of college, that's what I relied on, that work ethic that I had learned in my younger years. So I went back, was doing farm labor, but looking for something better. I ended up going to work on a commercial fishing boat, did that for a while, and I absolutely hated fishing. It was just miserable, but I loved the water, loved the ocean. When I was doing that, we were pulling into port one day and I saw these guys doing construction work from a barge. They were repairing a pier. And I thought, man, that's really cool. And I had been thinking it'd be kind of fun to do, framing houses or something like that. I thought that'd be great. I had taken a lot of woodshop classes during high school, really enjoyed building things. And but then saw these guys on the water. I thought, that's pretty awesome. So, but I was trying to get out of fishing, started looking for carpentry jobs, and I ended up getting a job installing garage doors, and really didn't do that very long. That was kind of frustrating. Usually, we'd show up on the job site, supposed to install a door, should take 3 or 4 hours to install the door, and everything was piled in the way. And of course, I was getting paid piecework, not an hourly rate. So my ability to make money was contingent on everybody else being prepared for me. So I only did that a few months, and then I had lined up a job to be a framer's assistant, building custom homes. But I ran into like an old Boy Scout leader who was working as a pile buck or pile driver, and he told me about an excavation company that had just picked up a little tiny job on the waterfront, rehabbing an old timber pier, and they were looking for some guys. So I could have gone to work as a framer's assistant for, I think it was like $6.25 an hour, or I could go to work on this little pier job for 14 something an hour prevailing wage. And so it was a no-brainer. So I went and got that job and started working on the water. Unfortunately, the excavation company that I was working for was a little sketchy at times, and good people, but just they didn't know how to run the business. So I worked there for about a year, but during that process, I got pulled into the office to start bidding. The owner of the company wanted to start going into marine construction, even though he had no equipment and no personnel to do the work. But so I found myself in an office with a set of plans, specifications, a legal pad, and a Portland phone book. And I was supposed to bid a job. I had no idea what I was doing. Absolutely none. But I applied myself. I made a lot of phone calls, asked a lot of really dumb questions, and started bidding. Eventually, I landed a little job for the U.S. Coast Guard. And I actually had two different ones. But anyway, I bid the job, I project managed the job, and then I had to go run the job, and I had no clue what I was doing. The reason I tell you all of that was because during this whole process working for that excavation company, I was trying to get a job at Bergerson Construction. Looked like they knew what they were doing, and it looked really cool. And I knew my time for the excavation company was short-lived. So when we were doing this little Coast Guard job, the Coast Guard inspector went over to visit Bergerson Construction because Bergerson had done a lot of Coast Guard work. and he was just chatting with the boss there and said, and the boss asked him how this little Coast Guard project was going, and he said it's been a nightmare, but they got this young superintendent out there, doesn't know much, but man, he tries hard. And so that conversation led to me getting hired at Bergerson Construction. And so that was a long time ago. That was 1992. So I went to work for Bergerson Construction as a carpenter, pile buck, really just a laborer because I really didn't know much. Um, After about 3 years, I was pile buck foreman, running a crew, and then a couple years later, I I had gotten married and was just trying to figure out what I was doing. Wasn't sure if construction was really where I wanted to stay, but um, I ended up leaving Bergerson and went and ran excavator for about a year and a half. Thought it might be really cool. Thought it might keep me a little closer to home because marine construction, we end up traveling a lot. Well, it didn't, and I found that what might be a dream job to some people, building logging roads out in the middle of nowhere with nothing but you and the excavator and a mile of stumps to dig. Um, and I found it to be really lonely, and I missed working with people. I missed the water, missed building structures. So in 1999, I returned to Bergerson Construction. And within a few months, I stepped into a superintendent role. Once again, I had no idea what I was doing, but at least I had a few years experience of building waterfront structures. So with the superintendent, Bergerson Construction is a small company. I didn't tell you that we do, 15 to $20 million a year, not real big, but 25 to 30 employees. So in a small company, obviously you find yourself wearing a lot of hats. So as a superintendent, if we were slow, I was pulled into the office and help with estimating. Once we get some jobs, I'd do a lot of project management work. And then when it came time to do the job, go out there and run it. So that happened back and forth for a few years. And then in 2005, our lead estimator was retiring, and I was still really struggling with the amount of time I was spending away from home. By this time, I had three little girls under the age of 5, and I was working 3 hours away, home on the weekends, gone during the week, and it was tough. So I was really questioning my life choices. And the boss called me up one day. I was working up in Bremerton, Washington, and he said, I couldn't sleep last night. He said, I've got this job going bad. I got so-and-so going through a divorce. I've got the estimator retiring. He said, I don't think I have it in me to train up another estimator. I've made a decision. I want you to pass off that job to somebody else to finish it up. I want you to come to the office, take over all the estimating and project management. You've spent enough time out of town. And I couldn't believe my ears. Yeah, called up my wife and said, it looks like I'm coming home here, shortly, and I'm going to be around home a lot more. So it was it was luck. It was being in the right place at the right time. It was an answer to prayer, all of these things. But that's how I stumbled into, full-time estimating and project management. So did that for a few years, and then I was presented with an opportunity for me and one other individual in the company to take over ownership. So in 2009, we took over ownership of this little marine construction company, and it's been a wild ride. Um, 2009 was not a great time to take over a company. We were in the middle of the Great Recession, the banking crisis of 2008. Um, that that didn't really hit our sector of construction until a couple of years later. You just so we didn't really feel it until I think it was about 2011, 2012, really. But we weathered that storm, came out a little battered, but a little stronger, um, and just continued doing what we do. So, fast forward to now, I find myself a little later in my career, uh, seen a lot of different things, done a lot of different things, done a lot of the same things. So I think one of the things that I've focused on, and I think this has been throughout my career, from from the time I was just a laborer on a crew to the time I'm leading a company, everything has been built on integrity and relationships. If I if I can't go home at night, hold my head high, knowing that I've done the best that I can in my abilities, and I've remained true to myself, true to my core values, then all of this is meaningless. So that's what I mean by integrity. I want to be able to treat people with respect. If I've done something wrong, I want to be able to go to them and have that conversation. If they've done something wrong, I want to be able to have a conversation with them. And I want to be truthful with people, and be a man of integrity. And that's really important in business. And then through that comes building relationships. There's there's relationships that I built from early in my career when I was on the crew that are important still today. Um, many people I've worked with have since retired, but there's still some around that I was working with back in the 90s that they know me, I know them, and we can do great things together because of the trust that we have for each other. So, with that, any questions before I move into the next thing?
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Greg. So, yeah, like you said, integrity and relationships are two of the most key aspects to being a good leader and being a good business owner. And I wanted to just kind of ask you, what have you found to be most effective in earning trust and relation and respect with crewmates? Especially, that's one of the hardest challenges as a young leader, as you're coming up through the ranks. You know, you might have been the best pile buck, or you were the best project engineer, and so you get promoted. Now you're the pile buck foreman. Now you're a project manager, and okay, you're going to lead these people that were once your coworkers a week ago. Now you're in charge of them. So obviously that relationship changes very fast. And so what have you found to be most effective in earning trust and integrity and then developing those relationships with your former coworkers in those types of situations?
That's a really good question, and it is a challenge for sure. I think one of the first things I had to learn as I was moving into leadership roles was no matter how much you don't like it, people are going to talk about you behind your back. So you have to just recognize that and then just let it go. Don't worry about it. It's human nature. People will say things, you know, and I don't like it when people speak badly about me, but it's human nature. So that's the first thing. You just got to realize that and set it aside. But the uh, I think one of the things when I started functioning as a project foreman, I was surrounded with with guys that were, you know, 20 years older than me, 30 years older than me, in some cases that had been doing this for a long time. Um, and so they had a lot of experience, but they were not leaders. So what I had to realize is my role was to lead, but it wasn't necessarily to boss people around. So what I tried to do early on was build rapport. So when you're on a pile driving crew, one of the most important relationships is between the foreman and the crane operator. So I remember one old guy, kind of a curmudgeon, always we nicknamed him Eeyore. And it gives you an idea of his personality. But I would go and talk to him and say, hey, we're the next thing coming up is going to be this, and I was thinking maybe we attack it in this manner. What do you think? And I'd start getting his feedback, and a lot of the time I wouldn't necessarily agree with his feedback, but at least we were having a conversation. And but then there was another guy. He was a pileback on our crew, and we are doing a lot of navigational structures for the Coast Guard. And but anyway, every day this guy would come to me, and he would have these just harebrained schemes. And he was like, "Hey, Greg, I was thinking we could do this, and then we could do that, and we could build this little thing." And I mean, I'd listen to him and think, "Man, what in the world is this guy on? How's he coming up with these ideas? That will never work." And yeah, so I was always saying no to him, and I just see his demeanor, get worse and worse and worse. And then I was stewing on it one night, and I was like, man, I gotta have a conversation with him. So I went to him. His name was Rich. He passed away here a few years ago, but one morning I went to him and said, "Hey, Rich, I feel like you're always coming to me with a lot of ideas about how we might do things." And I said, "First thing, I appreciate you bringing ideas." I said, "I feel like most often I'm just saying no, but here's the reason. A lot of times I've been in conversation with the superintendent. We have a kind of a set direction of how things need to flow here, and then our thought process and everything has been in that direction, and and so to take your idea would be taking about 5 steps backwards, but please keep bringing me the ideas, because if nothing else, your idea is a good plan B." And he was like, "Oh man, thanks." And then he was a team player from then on out on that project. And so it's treating people with respect, having conversations away from the heat of the moment, and and trying to build rapport, recognizing that they may have experiences that you don't have, and tap into those and use that to build your plan for a project. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that was excellent. I appreciate that. The old curmudgeon crane operator, I've got a team of those, so I know that one all too well. I've got a
Well,
question.
send them on over, because I'm always looking for crane operators.
Yeah. I got a question for you from the audience here. So this kind of goes back to your point about, your earlier days where you were struggling with the work away from home, which is again another theme that's all too familiar in our line of work. We struggle with the same thing in the bridge world, trying to travel across the Oregon and Washington and Idaho and trying to chase all these projects. It can be tough. It's a hard lifestyle. So question for you, with all the traveling work, long weeks away from home, how do you keep the team committed year after year? How do you ensure the future?
That's that's a tough one, and I don't think there's a simple answer. Um, I One thing that we do as a company, and I've had people leave uh, chasing the big money. They've gone to work for companies that are working, 712s. I mean, and they, a guy can go out and, chase that kind of work and make some really good money, make a couple hundred grand a year in some cases. But it kills any kind of family life. And I remember a conversation with one guy. He was a crane operator too, a young guy, super talented, and he left saying, "Hey, I'm going to go chase this work." And I said, I get it. You got to do what's good for you. But I said, just consider you've got a young family, and there's a price to be paid by going and doing nothing but working. And yeah, he didn't last in that job very long. His marriage didn't last. He actually came back and worked for me for a while, and then moved on to something different. But one thing we try to do as a company is we're kind of selective about some of the jobs we bid. Occasionally, we're presented with opportunities where we could bid some work where we would have to work, 6 or 7 days a week, lots and lots of hours. Workers wouldn't see their families at all for months on end, and I tend to shy away from those things, and because I'm a firm believer in the notion that we work to live. We don't live to work. Not everybody agrees with me on that, and so like I said, I have some people that have left and gone out there chasing money only. So, but it's a tough thing. The other thing is I've heard people over the years wanting to leave because of the out of town work, and just say that it's too hard on my family. The out of town work is killing my marriage and all of that. And then they leave and they find out that the problem wasn't the out of town work. The problem was that they had problems in their marriage, and that's the sad reality. But a lot of times people want to blame something like out of town work for their problems. But that said, it is not easy. A lot of times we try to work, a 4-10 schedule, so our workers can have a 3-day weekend with their family. Sometimes we're not able to do that, or we've got overtime, or we got to push hard. But it's a challenge, and it's not for everybody. What I've seen is the people that enjoy the work and realize that it's a good career. They find a way to make it work. One of the things I've always told myself is, living here on the coast, there aren't a lot of opportunities to make this kind of money and be able to live here on the coast. So I figured, hey, we got to travel a little bit to have this kind of wage. So anyway, I'm rambling, but it's a tough thing to address.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the answer on that one. Another question for you. So, like you said in your background there, you started basically at the bottom of the construction list, if you will, as a laborer, and you worked your way all the way up. Has your leadership approach evolved as you've moved up through the ranks, and also as you've transitioned from the field to the office?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, if you're not growing and changing, you're probably dying, for lack of a better word. This in this industry, really in any kind of career, you have to find ways to grow and adapt and learn and change. And in heavy construction, especially, but really any kind of construction, every day is a learning opportunity. Every day you're going to learn something more about yourself, learn something more about the industry, and you're going to have to adapt and change. In terms of leadership style, dealing with people, I worked under a lot of kind of old school mentality superintendents and foremen early in my career, and it took me a little while to get away from that. That's never really been in my DNA, but I took on some of that. So, uh, I come across from time to time as a bit of a hothead, and that doesn't get very far. Um, but being able to listen to people, have conversations, um, but realize there's a time where you've got to say, okay, well, this is the way it is. Like it or lump it, this is the way it is. I think that's a really important part of leadership. Yeah, and our culture has evolved tremendously over the past 30 years. Um, some good, some bad. We've got a a younger generation that's coming up that kind of melts under stern criticism, um, just because they weren't presented with that perhaps the way I was. Early in my career, I was dealing with people that were just yellers and screamers, and that doesn't get a lot done, but it's just the way it was. You kind of get thick skin and let it roll off your back, and stomp away and mutter and move on. But I've seen kind of some old school mentality superintendents try those same tactics now, and you got an HR mess on your hands. So learning how to adapt with the times, learning how to adapt with the culture and change leadership style it's an ongoing process for me and anybody in this industry. And 10 years from now, it's probably going to look different from the way it is now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, that's been a challenge the last couple of years. I'd say 5 to 10 years, where like you said, we're noticing a shift in culture and just um, thinking, if you will, between the generations. Like you said, that old mentality that we're just going to yell and scream and people are going to figure it out and they're either going to survive or they're not isn't working as well as it used to, with the younger generations. So, but it's important to get those younger generations within your company on board. This is the lifeblood of every company. So, what steps do you take to identify and mentor the next generation of leaders within your company, particularly those who might be following a similar path to your own, where they started out in the field and they're working their way into management?
That's a tough one. That's probably honestly one of my weaker points as a leader, and it's I'm not sure why that is. I There's a guy I hired a couple years ago. He's a seasoned construction professional. He's working as a superintendent for me right now, and he came out of the commercial building industry, and he's been really good about what he calls train your replacement. And he's spending a lot of time with the crew members saying, hey, okay, you're doing this project, this task, and you're really good at it. But what if you weren't here tomorrow? Who else is going to do that? So this young guy that you're working with, make sure you're showing him what you're doing. And then to the foreman, how are you training another guy to see things the way a foreman needs to see them? Um, and then he's working with his foreman to help him see the things that a superintendent might need to look at. So that's been really good, having that individual who's thinking that way. Um, I haven't done enough, admittedly, to develop that next generation. Sometimes my mentality is, hey, we're just going to show up and we're going to do our job. If you got questions, let me know. But that's not the best approach, and it's probably limited our company in some ways. So there's an honest answer for you.
And no, I understand that struggle all too well myself. So something we all have to work on, I think, and I think that's kind of why we got into this lull for the last couple of years, where there's been a shortage of people in the industry. Thankfully, we got people like Amber and AGC and Build Oregon Workforce trying to change that, but it's definitely a challenge. So. One of the things you talked about was when you were coming into Bergerson and as a ownership role, it was right around the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, which, as you hinted on, was not a good time. And then more recently, in the 2020, we had the COVID-19 pandemic going on, and both of these these issues impacted our industry heavily. And in my opinion, they've never been the same. How do you see those impacts affecting marine construction specifically? And how do you weather the storm, if you will, no pun intended, going through issues like that aren't so much so in your control? The world's changing around you, and somehow you got to adapt to it.
I remember years ago, I was talking to somebody in the office, and well, I think it was the previous owner of the company, and he said something about, yeah, we don't need to go out there and risk everything to lose money. I can stay at home and play cribbage and lose money. And and so in the early years of ownership for me, coming out of the Great Recession, it was kind of a hard lesson to learn that what we saw in marine construction was there was a lot of people bidding our jobs that really didn't have the experience uh, to do these things. And in the marine world, we assess risk a different way in our estimates than in some other sectors. And and so during that time, you had all of these other folks coming in bidding the work, and it was taking the margins out of our work. And so then we started bidding cheaper and cheaper, trying to land the work. And I'm remembering a couple of jobs in particular that kind of backfired on us because, okay, we got the work, but we did not have the right price, so lost money on those projects. And so that was a reminder to me, is you have to bid at a number that works for your company. And the danger is to bid the market. And of course, you've got to try to be competitive. But if you start chasing the low bid above all, you can build yourself a trap. So that was a big thing for me to learn. I was, young in ownership and trying to figure that out. It's like, hey, I got to feed this machine. How are we going to get the work? Getting work is good, but you need work that's going to pay the bills. So, but then, so if we look at COVID, and some of the things that happened, there's some bad things that happened, and I feel like our a lot of our workforce hasn't recovered from that. There's a lot of people that that just changed the way they think about work in general. And I think it kind of exacerbated some of our workforce development uh, issues that we have in our industry. But I also see that it really helped our industry. The construction industry always seems to lag behind other industries in implementation of technology. And I think because of COVID, we've gotten a lot better about that. And this event this morning is a prime example. You know, 6 years ago, if you talked about getting a bunch of people together on a screen for a virtual meeting, that just wasn't happening in our industry. I mean, some of the more advanced companies were implementing virtual meetings and all that, but 2018, 2019, it was a big deal to use GoToMeeting for a big conference call for a project. But now we use Zoom or we use Teams, and we're collaborating over a set of drawings and having project meetings with people in 3 different states, and it's phenomenal. I think it's absolutely revolutionized the way many small companies do their work. Big companies were probably already doing some of this, but the rest of us are catching up. And this is an industry that there's still a lot of construction offices that have a fax machine. So we are slow to adapt, but COVID certainly gave us a kick in the rear to make some things happen. So I think there's been some positives as a result.
That's great. Yeah, don't kick the fax machine out quite yet. We still get a couple that come across. It's mostly junk mail, but every once in a blue moon, we get an actual fax from somebody.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like we got to move on.
I see so many people they don't even advertise their fax number anymore on their account contact information. So
Yeah,
the changing
yeah,
market. But
yeah. Well,
um, one of the questions I had for you, talking about marine construction and how unique it is, is you're doing a lot of similar tasks that people do on land, but when you move it onto the water and like you said, working off a barge, how do you get to it? It presents a lot of unique challenges. And then also when you're working with on the water with the water, high tide, low tide, you know, uh, different types of weather patterns that we don't typically see landside. How have those unique challenges, specific to the marine industry shaped your leadership style and decision making? Do you have any thoughts of, or, kind of examples of how that's shaped your leadership style? Things that are unique to the marine construction that have shaped your leadership style?
I think it's um, one thing I talk about with my estimators all the time is risk assessment, and and we have to do that whatever kind of construction we're doing. There's always this element of risk assessment. It's magnified in marine work. You could have a perfect job, perfect structure, got lots of pile driving, lots of concrete work on it, and keep folks busy for a year and a half. It'd be great, but it's in a terrible location with high currents, exposed to wind and ocean swell, and you've got all these risks. So you have to consider that. Okay, we're gonna have 2 months out of the year that we can't even work there, or we're gonna run the risk of you know uh, breaking the spuds that are holding our crane barge in place, or would the crane operator is going to have a lot of time or a lot of trouble swinging things around because the barge is moving, so it's putting this extra motion into the hook that's hang or the load that's hanging from the hook. And then it's going to create more pinch points for the guys that are rigging and landing the loads. And so then we've got to factor that in. Okay, we're going to have to move slower. We're going to have to, or maybe this isn't even a job for us. There's been some really good work just a few miles from my office that we didn't even bid because of those conditions. A lot of ocean swell, a lot of exposure to wind, and it was not a good fit for our barges. The company that got it uh, had a much larger barge, and even they've had some challenges on it. So all of those things have to be factored in. So when we're looking at those jobs, I've got estimators that want to go conquer the world, and I appreciate that. But it's my job to say, okay, well, we have to consider this risk, this risk, this risk. How are we going to do that? If we can't answer those questions, then we need to consider not bidding this work because not all work is good work. So sometimes I have to be the naysayer, and sometimes that upsets people, but it's my job to protect the company.
That's good. Good. You've talked about risk a couple of times now, and it is such a tricky topic to learn, especially as a younger professional, because it feels like it's such a razor thin line, between being too risk adverse and being too cautious, but being too risky and dangerous. And it feels like that line's ever moving on you too. So
Hmm.
it can be really hard to find it. I mean, how do you try to teach that to, like you said, your younger estimators so they know just from their own standpoint where that line is? And how, so they're not relying on you every time to kind of point them in the right direction, so to speak.
We're a small enough office that we have a lot of those conversations, and I'm involved in a lot of those conversations. But there's been times where I've said to an estimator, I want you to call this superintendent, ask him what he thinks about this, and and then they get a big fat dose of reality. And yeah, that the project that I mentioned that we did not bid. One of the reasons I did not bid it was I felt like with my superintendents, if I had bid it, I would have had a mutiny. Nobody was going to want to go build it because of the physical risks on the job. So, um, but it's a tough thing. It's I I feel like as the owner of the company, I need to be involved in those conversations. But it's because ultimately I'm the one that's signing the paper saying we're going to do this job. But going back to some of my roots in being a young man in leadership over people much older than me, you have to rely on the experiences of others, and so ask questions, talk to those that have seen a lot of different situations and say, hey, what do you think about this project? Here's what I see as some of the challenges, some of the risks, and how would you approach that? Is this a concern or is it not a concern? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to give you really good feedback and probably bring up some other factors that you haven't even considered as you're looking for projects and looking at the risk. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, yes, it did. Thank you. So it's about 7:55. So we've got about 5 minutes left. So I got one last question for you, the big one, of course, So after all your years on the water and in business, how do you personally define leadership today? And has that definition changed since you first started in marine construction?
Well, I think what I said earlier is is we have an industry where integrity and relationships matter more than anything. Um, and and one of the things that I've learned over the years is working on the water. It's a very small world. I know because of the way I've operated over the years that I can pick up the phone and call any one of my competitors if I'm in trouble and they're going to help me out. Might not be free, but they're going to help me out. And that's because they know I'm a man of my word. We have a company that's built on integrity, and that fosters a good working relationship with people that you're bidding against on bid day. Um, Early in my career, I tended to view my competitors as my enemies. They're not my enemies. They just have a different company, but they're actually my colleagues working and fighting the same battles that I fight every day. And so there's a lot of value in collaborating. And I've had competitors call me up, say, "Hey, we got a problem. Can you bring a crane barge over and help us out on this?" And I've done the same thing with them, or we've rented equipment to each other, or we've even bid together on some jobs. So that's been a big shift in my mind over the years. It's like they're not my enemies. They're a competitor on bid day. The rest of the time, they're colleagues fighting the same battles as I am. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. So, like I said, we're getting towards the end here. So, unless there's any last minute questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So, I'll kind of give it one last call here on the questions and answers. Anyone have any few questions for Greg before we take off?
Well, I appreciate you having me on here, Dan. This has
Yeah, thank you for
been
making
fun.
time. It was great to hear your story, and I need you to send me that slideshow, those photos. I think I could have spent just an hour looking at those, talking about the different photos you had there, the marine construction, because like you said, it's interesting stuff.
By the way, I still play music.
That's great.
So, but I do that for fun. That's not my career. So I just do that.
That's awesome. So,
So,
okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it. And with that, I just want to one last quick shout out, by the way. So we have our last CLC event this weekend. We are hosting a tailgater for the Oregon State, Washington State football game down in Corvallis. So you haven't already and you have time, please feel free to join us at the tailgate from about 1:30 just before kickoff. But with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. And once again, thanks everybody for joining.
thanks, Dan.
Thank you.